So obviously there are far too many books to ever actually read them all. Even in just the fantasy book genre, I'll never read even a fraction of what is out there. So as readers, we find ourselves in this position to have to pick and choose and decide what to spend our time on. Sometimes deciding whether to even finish a book that we've already started, wading our way through all the reviews of supposedly very popular books, deciding whether it's for us or not. So I'm going to go down a list of popular fantasy authors that I have never read. I am doing this partly for the fun of getting to talk about books that I don't normally talk about in my videos because I have not read them. But also, by talking about these books by authors I have not read, I might make them sound interesting enough that I actually read some of them or inspire others watching this to read books that I don't normally talk about. And to start, the first author I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go ahead and just get right into it, Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is pretty well known at this point. He's written a lot of books, some of them quite popular, pretty well known for American Gods, Good Omens, Stardust, Coraline. He is an author that has masterclass writing classes. He is an author whose writing is thought very highly of. And I have heard so much about his books, so many good reviews, that I was coming around to the point where I was looking at some of his books and deciding if there was one I wanted to try. And a lot of them seem maybe a little more on the darker side than what I would normally choose. And so I wasn't sure what I should go for. And then news started to come out about some things he has allegedly done. And because of those things, I feel far less pressured to try out any of his writing. And I feel like because there is just so much to read, I can easily take him off the list and say, never mind, I'll go read somebody else. So as an author, I wasn't sure if I was going to read his books anyway, based on what I had read about the books themselves. And then now, because of him as a person, I feel okay just passing on them. And I do not feel at all bad about that. Next on my list is Joe Abercrombie. He's most well known for the First Law trilogy and Age of Madness. This is another author whose books are considered to be quite good. When I watch or read reviews or look up his books, people have mostly good things to say about them. The thing that has made me not sure if his books are for me are that his writing often gets compared to George R.R. Martin. Kind of like if you liked Game of Thrones and want more of the same kind of flavor of fantasy, try Joe Abercrombie. I was not a big fan of Game of Thrones, and a lot of that comes down to content, like grim and gritty type of content in my fantasy. And so for me to say that I probably don't plan on reading a Joe Abercrombie book, it is not me saying that I don't think he probably writes very good books. It's me saying I'm not sure his books are going to be for me. Kicked my tripod. Oops. The first book of the First Law trilogy is The Blade itself. It sounds like a well-done story by a good author, but if it's advertised to be on a similar scale content-wise to Game of Thrones, then I shall pass. And I am totally okay with that because I am fine with there being books out there that are super good and other people rave about and say this is amazing and it not being for me. That's fine. I don't feel like I'm missing out. The next one on my list is Jim Butcher. Most well known for the Dresden Files. Keep in mind, I am talking about all these books from the perspective of not having read them. So this is just what I know from the little bit of research I've done. I believe the Dresden Files are urban fantasy, like an alternate Chicago. Dresden, Harry Dresden is like this wizard, and maybe he solves crimes or something. I read one review that said that the Dresden Files could feel like a more adult version of Harry Potter because it's that urban fantasy with wizards. For me, I'm not usually a fan of urban fantasy. I'm pretty picky about it, and I have also heard enough about the sexism in the book that I'm not sure I want to read more of that. I say the book. It's quite a long series. There's like 17 full-length novels and then some short stories, and still going. There's gonna be like 20 books by the end. I will say though, I do have a couple of Jim Butcher books. I recently picked up the first 2 books of the Codex Alera, The Furies of Calderon, and whatever the second one is. There's a sticker on the spine, so I can't tell. So while urban fantasy crime-solving wizard maybe doesn't sound that interesting, this is the one that was based on the challenge given of it's not the idea that makes a good book, it's how it's executed. So this is like based on combining the ideas of Pokemon and the Roman Legion. And I thought that sounded interesting enough to at least give it a try. So Jim Butcher is an author that I have not read yet, but hope to at least try soon. And then if this is a good indicator of his writing style, if I like it, then I'd be more willing to try others of his. If you have read this and the Dresden Files and can tell me whether this is a good indicator of his writing style, let me know, but no spoilers. All right, next, Scott Lynch. And is it weird that in my brain I heard the character as an elf saying Miles Finch? Anyway, this is the author of The Gentleman Bastards, first book being The Lies of Locke Lamora. I have heard people that love that book and that series. Partly that it's like really fun. The main character is like this chaotic con artist kind of guy. It's like playful, but then dark later on, or even at the same time. That some of the dialogue can be a little crude. And it's just another one, I've heard so much about it. I have seen so many reviews, so many people talking about The Lies of Locke Lamora. I feel like it's one of those books that's been really hyped up. But then when I read about what the book is about, I'm not sure it sounds interesting to me. I get the feeling it's a little Robin Hood style, a thief who robs from the rich, but I don't know if he gives to the poor after that or not. I don't know. It sounds maybe a little too chaotic for me. I'm a very classic fantasy kind of girl. So if I'm going to read something outside of your classic fantasy genre, it's going to need to really catch my interest. And The Lies of Locke Lamora or other things by Scott Lynch have not done that for me yet. The next one on my list is Leigh Bardugo, which I hope I'm saying right. She is the author of the Grishaverse, which includes Shadow and Bone, a book that the Netflix series was based on, and Six of Crows, which I don't know which one is actually first in the series. Shadow and Bone got the TV series and Six of Crows did not. I believe this one is a little on the Russian-inspired side. I think Shadow and Bone is a little more seafaring, and Six of Crows is the heist book. I don't tend to go after a heist story. I know that's like one of the main ideas behind Mistborn, at least the first one. It's this heist set in a fantasy world. It didn't feel super heisty to me, and I've watched enough other booktube channels to know that the heist is actually a pretty popular trope in fantasy, which is one of those weird things that I'm like, I don't get it. I'm not really into the heist. That's not the trope I usually go for or enjoy reading very much. And if I do, the parts that I like are when the crew are sitting in the room together doing the planning, and then when it gets to the execution of the heist, it tends to be a little more action-centered, and I'm not a big action reader either. So I can see the draw, but again, probably not for me. That's fine. Next on my list is Rick Riorden. I have never read a Rick Riordan book. Most famously known for Percy Jackson. I've also never seen a Percy Jackson movie. When I did my recent book haul video and I showed that I found the first 3 Percy Jackson books, I said that originally the reason I hadn't read them is because they came out when I had already reached adulthood, and so I probably felt at the time like they were not for me, they were for people younger than me. Now I'm old enough that I don't care. I'll read a children's book, I don't care. I also don't know that I've read a good fantasy book based on Greek mythology. Yeah, I'm not sure. I do have the first 3 Percy Jackson books now. And then I have also this second series, The Heroes of Olympus, which I believe comes after the first Percy Jackson series. These are a little bit bigger. It's possible they're for a slightly older audience than the first series. I just found a full set that were in really good condition, and I was like, I'm either gonna read them at some point or my children are, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab those. That's the Goodwill sticker. I could do without those on them. Next on my list is Mark Lawrence. I did not realize how many books he had written. I also read this little teeny tiny biography by him. It's just what's posted on his website and I think on Amazon also. He's done a lot in his life, like high security clearance in the US and the UK. That's kind of interesting. He has written the Broken Empire trilogy, which I think sounds a little dark for me. The book that immediately came to mind for me for this author was The Book That Wouldn't Burn, because that's a book that I was looking at as possibly reading it last year. I don't remember if the second one recently came out or like the third one is coming out soon. I'm not sure. But it's a fantasy book that takes place in a library or is about libraries. And I love a book about books. It's starting to become one of my favorite tropes where a character in a book loves books and is a very bookish type of person. And to me, The Book That Wouldn't Burn still piques my interest. I'm still like eyeballing it, like I might pick it up when I've read some of the other books I've acquired, feel like I have some time for it. But right now, that is an author and a book that I am just in the space of there's too much to read. I'll get to it if I get to it, and if I don't, it's fine. That's gonna be my mantra whenever I don't read a book, is just gonna be, it's fine, it's fine. And then we have Brent Weeks. I feel like I've heard differing opinions on his Lightbringer series. Some people who love it and some people who it's not really for. I have not really looked into his books though, but the little blurb on Amazon is kind of interesting, so I'm just gonna read that. This is the blurb for book 1 of the Lightbringer series, The Black Prism. And it says, in a world where magic is tightly controlled, the most powerful man in history must choose between his kingdom and his son. In the first book in the epic New York Times best-selling Lightbringer series. So a world with tightly controlled magic, and a ruler has to choose between two things that are probably close to his heart, things that should be very important to him, a son and a kingdom. That does sound interesting. I find myself wondering why I have not looked into this series before. And so for this author, I don't feel like I have a very good reason to say I've never read anything by him, except, I don't know, there's just a lot of books out there. But unlike a couple of the other authors I've talked about, instead of saying I don't think this author's books are for me, I'm saying I might need to look into his books a little more. Next on my list is Patricia McKillip. This is an author I've seen floating around a little bit, and the book that I see recommended by her the most is, what's it called? The Forgotten Beasts of Eld. It looks like a children middle grade, like ages 10 to 12 geared fairy tale style fantasy. And in scrolling through some of her other books, it looks like most of her stories have that more fairy tale type magic influence to them. And again, it's just another author that I haven't looked into much, but now I want to. I do like a good fairy tale inspiration, especially if it's not a straight up retelling of old fairy tales. I don't mind those too, but I really liked the Emily Wilde books that felt kind of fairy tale-ish, but were not a retelling, they were their own thing. Next on my list is Gavriel Kay. This is an author that I have heard a lot of people say only positive things about. Probably most well known for Tigana, which I did look at Tigana a little bit, trying to decide if I wanted to read it or not. It's hard to tell. The thing that piques my interest the most about Gavriel Kay is having listened to the Writing Excuses podcast, and when they were talking about who do you think the fantasy author is for the reading enjoyment of other fantasy authors, and they threw in Gavriel Kay as like the author that other authors should read. And that sounds intriguing, like, why should people who want to write fantasy stories read this guy? What's so great about him? I don't know, but I kind of want to know. So for now, the reason that I have not read anything by Gavriel Kay is just he hasn't made it into my TBR yet. We'll see. And then the last one on my list for now is Tad Williams. Probably most well known for Memory, Sorrow, Thorn, the first book of which, Dragonbone Chair, I believe came out in the 80s. So you could classify this as classic epic 80s fantasy, but he wrote them over more time than that, and I have seen So many people talk about the Dragonbone Chair. His most recent book, still in the future by a little bit, The Navigator's Children, I believe is in the same world as Memory, Sorrow, Thorn, coming out November 12th of this year, 2024, which is probably why his earlier books are seeming popular right now. People are doing their rereads of the older stuff before the new book comes out, which I totally get. And I have been so back and forth on whether I want to try the Dragonbone Chair or not. If it is something that you have read, and me having said I don't really like grim, dark, gritty types of stories, you can let me know if it fits into that genre a little too much, or if it's worth giving a try. It's been around for a long time, and I hate that there's this well-regarded fantasy book that's been there for so long that I haven't even tried yet. I would be happy to hear your opinions on these authors, on maybe why you have also chosen not to read them, or if you have, you can try to convince me to read them based on what you think is so good about them, to help me decide if I want to read them. Thank you so much to my patrons. I appreciate you guys a lot. The link to my Patreon and Instagram will be in the description. I hope you're all having a good reading week, reading month, reading year, and happy reading. Bye.